Yes. All right, we are live.
Okay, everyone, welcome back from lunch. We are on Friday, January 9th. We are being joined by the treasurer and his team for an introduction and walkthrough to H 567. It is an act relating to unclaimed property, state retirement systems, and capital debt. Mr. Treasurer, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much for having me. Nice to be with the committee this afternoon. I wanted to mention, you mentioned our teams. I would like to just introduce them to the committee for those that haven't had the chance to meet them. It's our deputy treasurer, and he previously was the state director for Congresswoman Becca Balint for the last 3 years, and he came over with us in November. So we're very happy to have him on our team. And then Jeremiah Breer is our CFO. So he runs the Treasury Operations Division in our office, and he's been with us for about 3.5 years. Then Peter Trombley will be our point person in the legislature this year, and he's been working with me for a couple of years in the office for a year. So if you have any needs, David and Peter will be in here, quite a bit. Feel free to reach out to either of them. If you need any information from our office, you need anything from me, you have any questions about things that relate to our work or any ways that we can be helpful, just make sure you reach out to these folks and they'll get you what you need. So happy to run through the bill and some of the specifics with the committee, if that's the prerogative of the chair.
Yeah, I guess a little bit as to why, you and I and your team have been working on this on the sole sponsor of the bill. And I kind of teed that a little bit. So yeah, run through what you want, but then we're going to do a full page by page council afterwards.
Yeah, great.
Really strict research.
Yeah, that sounds great. So what I'll do then is give a very brief, broad overview. Then I'll go section by section just to talk a little bit high level about why each section is in there. And then that I don't think we'll steal the thunder from, the line by line.
Share the thunder. I like it. Share the thunder.
So, as the chair said, the bill impacts our unclaimed property division and our retirement division. Largely, the first 5 sections are pertaining to unclaimed property. The remaining sections are pertaining to retirement in some way. And then the last section is talking about a position for retirement and 2 positions for unclaimed property, which I'll talk about both at the beginning and later on. But just generally, our unclaimed property division, they are a small team, of 4 people with a temporary person as well. So, or team of 3 and then the director. So they work to return unclaimed property, forgotten property, missing money to Vermonters. So anytime you had a deposit maybe with a landlord or there was a final paycheck that they had a different address for you and it never got to you, those businesses, those nonprofits are required to turn that unclaimed property over to our office. And then it's our responsibility to reunite Vermonters with that unclaimed property. Generally, over the last 20, 25 years, the amount of unclaimed property coming into our office continues to go up at a really steady rate. Why is that? It's a national trend, but people are more mobile. There's just literally more people, around to lose more money. There are a lot of electronic assets that I think can sometimes be easier to lose. People's mailing addresses aren't always up to date. So for whatever reason it is, we've begun a pretty steady increase in unclaimed property. Similarly, we've been really focused on getting this money back to Vermonters. So we've done a lot of outreach. We've done a lot of communication. We've tried to do a lot of partnerships. We've been trying to do some automatic programs where we automatically send money back to Vermonters so they don't have to go through the paperwork and the hassle. And all of that has resulted in significant increase in claims. A couple of years ago, we had about 18,000 claims in a given year. And this past year was closer to 32,000 claims, so a really dramatic increase. That year where we had 18,000 claims, it was about 3.8 million that we returned to Vermonters. And last year we returned about $9.8 million to Vermonters. So that's all good, but that is certainly very taxing on our team in terms of being able to process those claims, verifying the information, making sure that we're paying the right person, getting all the documentation that we need. And the statute, has some requirements around that. So it's been a significantly increased workload. All that being said, even though we're paying out more to Vermonters, we're still collecting more in unclaimed property from holders. It's coming into us. The amount of money that we send to the general fund has gone up every year as well. And we anticipate that continuing to happen, even if we got these two positions that we're requesting. And just for the committee's benefit, our unclaimed property division is self-funded. We are paid with the proceeds of the unclaimed property funds. There's no general fund money that goes into our unclaimed property division. So that's just the broad overview. In terms of these sections, section 1 is relating to an issue that we've identified when it comes to unclaimed property that comes from a medical insurer. So they will oftentimes send us an unclaimed property package. It'll have a specific dollar amount, let's call it $25,000, and it will just say for ABC Hospital. But we don't know, is it really for the hospital, or might it be for a number of patients that have been treated at the hospital that paid out of pocket and are now being reimbursed? And they never were able to get that money directly to the patient. They don't currently provide us enough information for us to make that determination. So what we want to have happen is we want to require the insurer to provide us some identifier, whether it's an explanation of benefits number to identify the patient or some similar number that we will then pass along to the hospital and say, can you identify who this money is supposed to go to? And then can you also make the direct reimbursement to that patient of yours? So it's something that's really a consumer enhancement, making sure we're getting the money to the right person. We just don't have the authority now to require that for insurance companies. We are just paying the hospital or providing the hospital that money because that's as much information as we have. It very well may be their money in many cases, but we have an expectation that in not all cases it is, that in some cases it's actually Vermonters' money. We want to make sure we get it back to them. So section number 2 and 3, this is relating to unclaimed property, but it's also relating to a program that you're familiar with called Vermont Saves. This is a publicly administered retirement program that we started here in this committee 3 years ago. And we got the authority to set it up. We got a one-time appropriation of $750,000. We entered into a contract with the state of Colorado that helped us set the program up as quickly as any other state has done it. I think we were about the 7th state when we set it up. And now there's well over a dozen states that have a similar program. So we were toward the early end, but not the first one, which gave us a lot of examples from other states about how best to do this, and we were able to set it up very quickly. So this past December, it launched for the first time, December 2024. It's now gone through its 1-year anniversary. We have about 1,300 businesses that are engaged in the program. There are about 5,300 individual employees who are saving in the program. And then collectively, they've saved about $5 million, in this first year. And it's really grown like this throughout the year, the number of businesses, the number of people saving, and then the dollar amount as well. So we anticipate, in the next, 5 years or so, that we'll be at about 20,000 accounts, we're at 5,300 now, that in the next 5 years, we'll be at tens of millions of dollars rather, tens of millions saved. We're at 5 million now. So it's all proceeding, very well. When you look at the data, of those 5,300 folks, 55% of them are under the age of 40 and 30% of them are under the age of 30. So 55% under 40, 30% under 30. So it's a lot of young people saving, which we really was one of the hopes of this program. And that's what we're seeing. So that has been great too, because even just a couple of $100 by someone in their 20s every month, will be hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time they reach retirement. And we've been in touch with a lot of businesses and nonprofits across the state as well, wanting to understand how is the program going? How do their employees appreciate it? And how do they appreciate it as an employer? And of course, not a universal sentiment, but the message that we've been hearing, by and large, is our employees have been asking for some kind of retirement program, and we haven't been able to afford it, or we always thought about it, but put it off. And now we've been able to provide it to them, and they're very happy. And them as an employer have been telling us it's easy to use, and we feel like this is a recruitment and retention tool for our workforce. So the feedback across the board has been very strong. So the reason it's in here is, the one-time appropriation is set to run out in this fiscal year, the $750,000. It requires about $300,000 to run annually. That's sort of the rate. Most of that is for 2 employees that run the program. Some of it's for some money that goes to our vendor and some outreach money. And this year, last year we collected, I don't know, about $18,000, let's say, in fee revenue. Next year, it'll be more like $38,000 in fee revenue. The next year it will be more than double that. But it's going to take a little bit more money to get us between here and let's say 5 or 6 years from now, when the program is self-sufficient from the fees that are being charged. We get a very small fee from an annual account fee, and we get a very small fee from the assets under management as well. So as those accounts grow and as the assets under management grow, the amount of revenue that comes into the state will grow as well. So over the next 6 years, we expect it to be about 800,000, about what we had previously that we'll need. When we asked for the 750 3 years ago, it was the smallest appropriation that any state had asked for. So Maine had a much more significant appropriation, so did Delaware. So, it's going well and is successful, but we need to get it to that point of sustainability. But our suggestion in terms of revenue source is not to take it from the general fund. We have a transfer that we make from our unclaimed property fund every year that goes into something called the Higher Education Trust Fund. And it's about, anywhere between $150,000, $200,000 that goes into that fund. We're suggesting that it gets diverted from that fund into Vermont Saves on a temporary basis until the program is sustainable, and then it goes back into the Higher Education Trust Fund. And the reason we picked that as a proposal is because that fund got a significant windfall this past year from excess estate tax revenue. It was about a $26 million one-time deposit into that fund. So that trust fund went from $30 million to basically $60 million overnight. And just to give you a sense of how long it took to get the $30 million, the fund was started in the year 2000. So it took it 25 years to get to 30 million. And then overnight it got to 60 million. So it's in a really good position in terms of its ability to provide money for scholarships for students for higher education in Vermont. We've talked to the stakeholders of that Higher Education Trust Fund, PSAC, UVM, the Vermont State Colleges. They all have been in support of using this money temporarily to support this other program, given the windfall that has gone into the Higher Education Trust Fund. So that's sort of our proposal and the reason for it. And it's in the unclaimed property section because it would be coming from our unclaimed property division.
Okay.
So section 4 and then similarly section 5 kind of deals both with a consumer component, making it easier and more efficient for consumers to get their money back. But it also deals with the sort of workforce capacity issue that I mentioned as well. So our proposal is to streamline this sort of fast claims process that we have in our office. We can do a fast claim if it's under $250. That means that we don't have to have original documents. We don't have to have notarization. We don't have to have certain information that sort of, might be overkill when you're talking about a claim as low as, $100 or $50. So those are fast tracked through our office once we have a reasonable determination that it is that person's money. We'd like to raise that threshold from $250 to $1,000. It will help us return money more quickly. There's less bureaucracy. Even $500, a lot of times you'll hear from Vermonters who are required to provide notarization or some other original documentation, and they'll be really frustrated that they have to do that because they're like, it's my money. Can't you just get it back to me? So I think consumers will be happier. There's very low risk just because of the amount of money that's at stake relative to how much in claims we pay out. And also our team will be freed up in terms of a lot of that bureaucratic documentation that they have to handle and require to be able to approve a claim that's over $250 now. So I think it's a win all across the board. And we want to make that proposal. Similarly, on section 5, it's raising the threshold for claims that would have to go through probate. So right now, anything that's over $5,000 that would be paid from a decedent to somebody that's a beneficiary in some way. If it's over $5,000, we require it to go through probate. We'd like to raise that threshold to $10,000. This doesn't happen as often, obviously, as the claims that are between $250 and $1,000. We have a lot of those claims, but it still is a regular occurrence. And it also is just a lot of work and bureaucracy for a family to have to open up a probate if they don't have to otherwise. And by doing this, we're just helping folks out a little bit, Vermonters, and freeing them from the burden, getting them the funds that are owed to them a little bit more quickly as well.
Do you have any idea, like the last time the threshold was raised?
Yeah. I know that we did that big, national unclaimed property administrators reform, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago when Beth Pierce was treasurer. So I think those thresholds were put into place then.
In that era?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, that's almost like close to an inflationary.
Yeah, I mean, inflation has been quite
right.
high in the last 6 years. But just in terms of
Yes.
when we think about, just from even our own experience, like when we were, what claims do we think are risky? What claims are there additional bureaucratic benefit, bureaucratic burden rather, not benefit? Where does the consumer get more frustrated when they have to provide, original documentation or notarization? And we think these are sort of good thresholds for where we are now and for the present time. And then just the other part of that section, payments that are made to joint owners. So if there's a decedent and there is a brother and a sister, for example, that threshold for making a fast claim was $250. And now we want to move that up to $1,000 as well. So it's just making it in line with the other threshold that we want to move from $250 to $1,000. It just sort of, it just is the same rationale as the others. So that's everything with unclaimed property in terms of what we're asking for in terms of the policy changes and the statutory changes. I mentioned that section 24 does request 2 positions as well. And I mentioned that the rationale for that is the claims increase that we've seen. We've also seen fraud increase as well. Like there's a lot of fraud. I mentioned that these are low risk because they're low dollar amount. We still have to verify it's the right person. There's still work that goes into that. But we've seen a lot of attempts on larger claims to try to defraud, the unclaimed property division from money. And, unfortunately, the ways that people can do that are quite sophisticated. They can create licenses. They can create original documentation that looks like the original thing. There's no way we can differentiate. For larger claims, we do require somebody to physically come into our office to pick up the check. It's kind of one of the only ways we can actually verify that the property we own or hold rather, and the property that somebody is owed is the rightful owner. So it's a little bit going back in time to, but it's something that we think we have to do sometimes to verify the person and make sure it's the right person.
1 second, Representative Isfeld?
But I was just trying to ask some questions before we go on to the other sections.
Yeah, please. Yeah, I'd rather.
I've got a couple questions. As a town clerk, I've spent many, many hours trying to get unclaimed property to my constituents. Lots of them are less than $1.
Yeah.
They don't want to bother. That's not worth the cent. Would it make sense to have a proposal that if it's less than $10 after 2 years or whatever, the state just takes the money?
Yeah, it's a great question. So remember, I was mentioning the higher education transfer that we make. So the reason we make that transfer is that we do a calculation every year of properties that are 10 years or older that are under $100. We're suggesting in the statute that $100 gets raised to $150 because that hasn't changed in quite a long time. And that's just sort of inflationary as well. But we then transfer that money to the higher education trust fund. The only difference is that people never lose the right to claim their money. They can always come back and say, hey, wait a minute, that $100 was mine. And we just figure that out through, our calculations.
So does their name remain on that?
Yeah, it
list?
does.
Well, that's what I was trying to.
Yeah. The one thing, I think it's a great idea. The only reason at this moment in time, I'd say let's just continue to wait and see is because a number of unclaimed property divisions across the country are facing legal lawsuits over similar concepts. And the reason they're facing them is eminent domain sort of thing. You can't take somebody's property without just compensation. And they're saying, hey, you're taking my money and, the government's taking the money. They're not giving me just compensation. So there's some constitutional and legal battles that are trying to be sorted out.
I get that, but you would think for something less than $10.
No doubt. But you know how lawyers
For
are.
so many years. It would cost more to fight for it than to.
It costs us about $4 to write a check. So
Yeah,
we would be happy to.
So that's my question is, as a town clerk, I was going into banks a lot of times when they were changing the safe deposit boxes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What happens to all of that property,
Yes. So
those items.
we have a physical vault in our office. It's not like you would see in a bank, but it is a vault room. And those safety deposit boxes are turned over to our office. So we have unclaimed property in cash. We have unclaimed property in stocks, and then we have physical
Oh, I saw it
property
all.
as well. Yeah. So we have about $150 million in unclaimed property. That's money. There's about 20 or so million that's in stocks. And then the valuation on the physical property, that's based on, what somebody might value it at, but it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But when you go in there, I mean, it's everything from gold bars to family heirlooms to, Tiffany jewelry to Tiffany, silverware to locks of hair, I mean, personal items like that,
Wallets.
yeah. Baseball cards. Yeah. So that money,
Like a Storage Wars thing.
yeah, no, yeah.
Auction it off.
Really, after so many years, it should be just being,
In some states, they do auction it off. The reason for it is that they run out of space in their vault.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so it's.
Yeah.
It's funding space.
So they turn the physical property into money and then they leave, they don't take the money away. It's still in there. So if you had a safety deposit box, the website is called missingmoney.com. It's the one we send people to because it's every state treasurer in the country. So you can search all at once. But if you search, it'll tell you like physical property or safety deposit box, or the cash or potentially the mutual fund. So it's in there in our database when people search for it.
Brett, when you're done, Cindy?
I think so. I had another one, but I can't think of what it is right now.
No, it just made me think about it, Mr. Treasurer. How do you safeguard that from potential?
Fraud within the office.
Yeah.
Burglary.
Yeah.
Like just,
Not that I would say, I'm
Yeah.
referring that would occur,
No
but
doubt. Well,
I mean, we're humans and humans do that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it is a locked, physically locked,
Yeah.
secure facility. Just for an example, like I don't have the ability to get into that room and I've actually never been in that room.
So the custody's very narrow.
Yeah, exactly. Custody is narrow and you don't go in with one person, it's multiple people. And, we have an inventory of what's in there. I think we will in the near future want to do a re-inventory and then an audit. So that's another part of what you do as well.
Sure.
But yeah, who has access to it? And then,
It's pretty controlled.
yeah, exactly right.
Thank you.
I believe Rep Stone.
Yeah, do you see this having like any impacts on the administration in your office? Like, do you feel like these changes will have any administrative impact on the treasurer's office? And are there any additional resources you feel like you need?
Yeah, so, I think what we're sort of suggesting when you think about the statutory changes and then the position request is both of them in some ways are designed to make it easier for our office to function. The threshold changes will mean there's less back and forth with individual Vermonters that are trying to claim their money because we don't need something that's notarized or we don't need the original birth certificate or whatever it might be that, we normally need. So that'll make it easier for them to process claims on the one hand. Then on the other hand, the additional two positions will make it easier to process claims, make it easier to do diligence on fraud sort of concerns around claims. And it'll also give us some capacity to look at the people that actually hold the money, the businesses and the nonprofits. Because sometimes they'll turn money over to us, but they don't turn all of it or they don't turn enough of it over. Or there's some businesses that like national businesses that have never turned money over to us. And we suspect that they probably do and they just are not following the Vermont statute. So across the board, it would help us with the functions of our office.
In general. I do have another question. That's been asked of me. So for instance, if somebody's on there, they've passed away.
Yeah,
Their children want to claim it.
Yep.
But they don't want to open up the estate because it's only like $35.
right.
So how do they go about getting a check? Does the check then get written to the child that's claiming it? Or do they have to prove that there's 5 other brothers and sisters?
Yeah.
Or what do they do?
So we'll, right now, as it is, if it's under 5,000, they won't need to open the probate estate.
Okay.
We want to make that higher,
Higher.
10,000, to make it easier to get money back to them without having to go through that. If you have $8,000 and you have to hire a lawyer to open up the probate estate and you're spending that time and everything, I mean, you get to a point where you're thinking, what's the value, So we want to make that easier and get it back to people. If it's under 5,000 now, or if it's under 10,000, if the statute passes and there's multiple family members, then there's a couple of different ways you can deal with that. You can split it up so each family member gets a proportional share. If the family has some kind of arrangement where they say, we want this one sibling to have it all, as long as there's a documentation among the other siblings that that's their intent, then we can honor that intent as well. So it's just working.
Or if that person is the executor of the estate or whatever.
Yeah. If there is a estate open. Yeah, exactly.
And then the other question is, what do you do as a town clerk if you know that somebody has died? They're in there for a lot of money
Yeah,
and there's no children.
right.
What do you do?
Yeah, so there's still, there's potential under the transfer, the decedent transfer. There's still possibility that there's somebody like a niece or a nephew that would, be in line to receive that. So it still stays in our unclaimed property until until that person claims it. If they never claim it, it really just remains in unclaimed property. And just so the committee is aware, I say we have 150 million in unclaimed property. That's how much if every single person woke up and said, I'm going to claim my penny or my dollar or my $10 or, all the money, that would be how much would be eligible to be paid back to people. But some of that money is 50 years old. It's, multiple levels away from somebody that's alive. There's money that gets turned over to us where the company says, I don't know who this belongs to. We don't have the records, but it's not our money and we're going to send it to you. So there's a lot of money we know won't get paid back. And ever since this unclaimed property program has existed, the treasurer's office does a calculation that looks at paying the claims in that particular year, paying for the staff that it's required, making an assumption about claims for the next year. And then we send a general fund transfer to the legislature to use in the budget. So when we say there's 150 million, there's probably only, 18 or 20 million that we hold to pay those claims, pay ourselves, and then have a reserve for future claims. If every single person woke up and claimed their money, we'd have to, come to legislature and ask for some repayment, I guess. But, that is such an unlikely occurrence is why we can do that transfer. So it's not like the money sits there forever and there's no good use for it. The money that we do hold, we earn interest on it. And then the money that we think is in excess, we do send here to the legislature for spending.
All right.
So getting on to section 6 and the rest of the sections that relate to retirement. Section 6 is about the state retirement system. So we don't have the authority under the state retirement system to have a penalty for late or inaccurate employer payments to the pension system. Now, you would think it's only the state of Vermont that's the employer and, state of Vermont makes their payments to us on time. But there's also a couple of municipalities and sheriff's offices that are in the state system. And we don't have any authority if they don't pay us on time. We don't have any way to force them to do that. And the thing that is the issue, the only authority we have is to kick their employees out of the system, which seems unfair since it's the employer that's not paying their share of the contribution. The other systems that we manage, the teachers and municipal systems, do have authority for us to apply late fees and penalties. So what we want to do is expand that to be equal across the 3 pension systems. And we have run into examples recently where those offices that are not the state, but are paying into the state pension system have been late and have not paid us on time. And we obviously don't want to punish those employees. We want to leave them in. But at the same time, when we don't get the money when we need it, we're kind of underfunding the pension system. That money's not in there working and earning investment return to help pay for those benefits. So we think it's an important authority. It will be similar to the authority that we already have for teachers and for the municipal employers. So section 7, this is in connection to the state pension and retirement system, really the OPEB system. So OPEB stands for other post-employment benefits. It's primarily healthcare. So when you're a teacher or a state employee, you work toward your pension and you also work toward your healthcare benefit. They're all separate systems. We have a teacher's pension, a state pension, a teacher's OPEB, and a state OPEB. And when the pension reforms occurred a number of years ago, we got both of those systems, all of those systems back on a better track to be fully funded. The pension system is by 2038 and the OPEB system is by 2048. We've made really good progress the last 5 years. We've had funded ratios that continue to go up. Everything is moving in the right direction. So in some ways, it's a good problem to have because what we're trying to solve for by asking to create a task force to look at this amortization question in terms of how do we get from where we are now to 2038 is the closer we get to 2038, there is an assumption that is off. The market goes down in a way that is dramatic. all of a sudden, a much larger unfunded liability could be created than we were expecting. And we only have so many years to spread that unfunded liability over. So what would happen is we would have a really significant market downturn, let's say, when we're only about 5 years away from 2038. That unfunded pension liability would be realized immediately. It would be spread over a really short number of years. And it would mean that the annual payment that we're requiring from the legislature to go to the system would just dramatically balloon. And you could be in a situation where the legislature is not in a position to fund that. You could be in a position to fund that, but it would mean cutting a lot of other priorities. And what we want to try to do is avoid that risk. But instead of coming forward this year and saying this is the solution to this problem, we want to have a task force that brings all the stakeholders together, similar to the pension reform task force, but much, much more narrow, focusing on this specific question. We do think there are some really viable solutions to basically getting the systems close to or maybe all the way funded on the timelines that we expect, but reducing a lot of that risk that could come from a budgetary standpoint between now and 2038. So our goal is to have the task force, to have the stakeholders come together and then to come with a proposal, a recommended proposal by everybody at the beginning of next legislative session. I'll just flag also that there is a request.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had a hand over here. Yeah.
Just because I know it'll probably come up this year, are there fiscal notes or cost estimates that you have for the administrative burden to that task force?
Yes, exactly right. If you look on the last sentence there, we say 75,000 for one-time appropriation. And that would be for actuarial services. Like we'll need to have a few scenarios run, look at the different, approaches that we could take. But just to give you a sense of that, I mean, one of the scenarios that we looked at, if things went dramatically wrong and it was really close to the end of the system, and we're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that could pop up, basically overnight that the legislature would be, required to come up with to fully fund the pension by 2038. So sections 8 to 20, this is specific to those OPEB funds that I mentioned. When we did the pension reforms a number of years ago, we broke off VPIC, the Vermont Investment Pension Commission. It was called the Vermont Pension Investment Committee previously. The staff of that committee were part of our office. Our office was heavily involved in that. But one of the governance items was to break them out of the treasurer's office, make them their own independent commission, and then have them have a board, that sort of oversees their work. So that happened. They took the billions of dollars in pension investments that they manage with them, and they're managing those pension investments. But what got left behind were the investments for OPEB. At the time, we only had about $62 million between the teachers and the state employees. So it was a relatively small amount of money. There were some questions about administratively how would VPIC keep those funds separate, but also invest them at the same time. But since we've committed to pre-funding OPEB just in this short 3 or 4 years, that number between the two systems is closer to 400 million, and we expect it to continue to grow quite substantially into the future to the point where it's billions of dollars, similar to the pension fund. So it's getting to the point now that it's at 400 million where we would need to hire more staff or more resources to manage that. And if we're going to hire somebody in our office to manage this portfolio, just don't think it makes a lot of sense when VPIC is there established doing that kind of investment on their own. So this suggestion is that we transfer the responsibility of managing those funds from our office to VPIC to manage them. The other thing to mention from a governance standpoint is with the OPEB funds, I myself as the treasurer has sole fiduciary responsibility. So I would make those decisions myself. The trend across the country has been to move toward a board. So you don't have one person making that decision, but a group of people. And that's what the Vermont Pension Investment Commission is set up to do. So I think it's good governance that we do that. Again, we would be in a position where we need a position in the near future to manage that fund. And we just don't think that makes sense since there's a team at VPIC. So section 21 and 22, this is relating to VSTRS and VMERS. So VSTRS is the teacher system, VMERS is the municipal system. And we want to have it be authorized that members of those two systems that they can purchase service credit for their time served spending as president of an employee organization such as the NEA while being fully released from employment. So this would be similar to other purchase agreements that we have for military service or Peace Corps service or other sort of school service. We are in support of it because it is actuarially neutral. You have to pay in the amount that is actuarially required. There won't be any cost to the system. And it does provide organizations like the NEA more flexibility in terms of who can serve in their leadership. So somebody that's early career or mid-career might not want to leave because of the retirement benefits being so critical to them. But now a whole host of additional individuals will now be eligible to serve because it is much more financially advantageous for them to do so. So that's why those organizations want this change. But from our perspective, again, it's revenue neutral and it's something we're happy to support. So section 23, this is the last sort of substantive section. This is relating to CDAC, the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee. So our office is the chair of CDAC, and we regularly meet, but particularly at the beginning of a biennium, to make a recommendation about how much debt the state of Vermont can issue that puts us in line with our needs, but also puts us in line with, what other states are doing, what other AAA highly rated states are doing, so that we don't fall too out of line with, best practice, if you will. We made a recommendation pretty much over the last 10 years of issuing less and less and less debt, trying to get our debt burden down. And that generally is a good thing. But what this change would do is include some other considerations when we're making that recommendation, including the useful life of state infrastructure. So basically, how much need might we have in the next few years? And that should factor into how much bonding capacity we think that we have, potential future capital maintenance and replacement costs, and then other metrics recognized by bond rating agencies, specifically unfunded pensions. So the rating agencies used to look at states and say, how much bonded debt do you have outstanding? And that gave them a good sense of like how much in debt you were. But then over time, the rating agencies said, well, for the state of Vermont, we have $600 million in outstanding bonded debt, but we have billions of dollars in unfunded pension liability. And more, the rating agencies are incorporating both of those when they're thinking about how much debt a particular state has. So we want to be able to include those kind of factors when we're making our recommendation through CDAC. We passed language very similar to this last year. There were some changes that the CDAC committee, including the administration, agreed to that didn't make it through for whatever reason. So this really is kind of a cleanup item from last year. The administration asked if we would propose it, and we said we'd be happy to do so. I don't view it at this point as anything that's substantive based on what was changed last year, but I think it's important to get the language correct and what everybody agreed to. So then section 24 is what we've been alluding to, which is the position requests. I mentioned the unclaimed property positions. There's sort of that data in there that describes sort of the increased workload and what these positions would do that I've mentioned. The retirement division, I haven't mentioned sort of the reason for that, but this would be a policy and research manager. And when you look at our retirement division and then look at how many employees they serve, we basically have a single employee for every 2,800 members of our pension systems. And that's one of the leanest pension systems in the country. On average, there's one employee per 1,300 members. So we're more than double that. And then when you look at pension systems that are similar in size to Vermont, it's one employee per 1,200 members. So that's almost, well double what we have. So we run a very lean operation. We have a very complex pension system, for how small we are. So
I concur.
So our team at times gets taxed, and we want to make sure that they have the capacity to do what they need to do. The stakeholders of the pension system, we've talked to them, and they can mention their support. They all seem supportive of the concept. One example from this past summer, on July 1st, we got a notice from Blue Cross Blue Shield for the teachers' retirement that they were going to propose a 50% increase, 50, for this upcoming year. So that was a significant increase. It would have meant a significant impact to retired teachers. It would have meant a significant impact to the state budget as well. So we quickly pivoted. Our retirement team went out to try to find alternatives, did a lot of due diligence. We didn't think we'd find viable alternatives necessarily. We thought we'd have to take the 50% rate increase. But ultimately, we did develop an alternative in HealthSpring. We did due diligence with them. We had to do a lot of work to get the contract into place where we could execute it, but we did, and that increase was 16.8%. So much lower increase. It saved the state about $20 to $22 million this year to not have to get the 50% rate increase. It saved teachers hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So we were really happy with that from our retirement division, obviously, but it is projects like that which can, potentially they don't have the time to work on something that major because they're so lean. So it's building out a little bit of capacity in that division.
All right.
And again, I should mention, just like unclaimed property, the retirement division is self-funded through the retirement systems as well. So it's not a general fund request.
Right. Questions for the treasurer on the back half of that?
That retirement fund's doing well.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a time, before the pension reforms, right?
I haven't taken them yet.
Oh.
Hey, just checking.
You're in
Not the onboard.
FEMA's, when we did the pension reform, FEMA's was size structures. They were in a relatively well-funded position. We continue to look at all of the systems, and whenever we see any issues, we try to act quickly. VEMR's has had its funding ratio come down a little bit, but we did enter in an agreement that the legislature passed maybe 2 years ago now to extend some increases in contributions from employees and employers into that system to try to get it on the right setting. So it's in a good track, and the teacher system and the state employee systems are in good tracks too. The teachers at one point was about 50% funded, which, when you get below 50%, you're getting really worried, but it's over about 62 or 63% funded now. And then the state employees was about 60% funded, and now it's up to 72 or 73% funded. So over the last 4 or 5 years, they've started to climb out of the challenges that they've been in. It doesn't come without a lot of money from the budget, but the progress is important because once you pay those down, there'll be significant freed up capital, and basically either you pay now or you pay more later.
Anything else for the treasurer?
Well, I thank the committee for your time and thank the chair for sponsoring the bill, and any questions that folks need, we're happy to get back to you and make sure we get you the information you need.
I have always loved a good treasurer's office sponsor. So yes, this is right in my comfort zone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Well, thank you. And with that, we will shift over to council and just do just due to time. I have a 2:30 with speaker's office, so we'll do more of a jaunt through the words and then dive into it deeper later.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, gentlemen.
Always with the acronyms, that crew.
I know, that's right.
Pension system is acronym bust. Oof. Council, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Happy Friday afternoon. It's my first time being with you all. So with your lead, Mr. Chair, I'll just do an introduction for myself. And so my name is Cameron Wood. I'm an attorney with the Office of Legislative Counsel. As I just said, my first time being with you all, but within my portfolio is housing, consumer protection, and then I also cover retirements and pensions for the office. So that's why I got this lovely draft. And it was a pleasure working with the sponsor and the treasurer's office and pulling it together. I will highlight, I clerked for this office around 10 years ago. That was my first job with the state of Vermont. I'm originally from the state of Alabama. I went to the University of Alabama, both for undergrad and law school. So I know I have a fellow alumnus here on the panel.
I was just wondering which one was gonna fire.
The great thing is when I was a clerk, my office was actually right outside. It was literally on the other side of the wall. So happy to be here. I was assured by my team lead, Tucker Anderson, who I know you all are familiar with. He assured me that I would have a hogshead of whiskey as soon as I finish this walkthrough. So I'm going to try to be succinct And for those not familiar with that reference, I'd be happy to share the video with you.
There, so I found actually some other scalable measurements from that era that I want to, let me just say I'm saving the image for when we get into the alcohol bill, but it escalates from Hogshead. Yes. Actually, before we jump into that, I want to take a second since you are new here for the first time. We don't do this often, but let's just do like an around the horn introduction. I mean, you already know me, Representative Matt Byron, for Jen's area as chair of the committee.
Representative Lisa Hingo, Franklin 5 on the Canadian border. I'm vice chair of the committee.
Representative Sandy Pinstall, I represent Bennington Rutland 1, which is Danby, Dorset, Mount Tabor, Peru, and Land Grove.
Michael Morgan, all of Grand Isle County, so 5 towns area, Alberg, Islamont, North Hero, Grand Isle, South Hero, and then the western corner of Milton.
Gail Coppin, Windsor District 2, so it's Cavendish, Weathersfield, and Baltimore. 3 towns.
Mary Catherine Stone, Alabama grad, Burlington rep.
Kate Nugent, a part of South Burlington.
Hi, welcome. Shay Waters Evans. I'm from Charlotte and I represent part of Heinsberg as well.
And not with us today are Representative Boyden of Cambridge, and we are absent both of our troopers, one from Randolph and one from Burlington.
Okay, I will jump right in, H567. Thank you all for having me. I think that Treasurer Piecek did a great job of really describing the bill, both the intent behind the bill from the Treasurer's office, which they speak to, not me, but also the substance of the bill. There really wasn't anything that I felt that was missed. So, I think he did hit on all of those topics, but just to run through the language very quickly. As was mentioned, the first 5 sections are related to unclaimed properties. As was mentioned, I think a lot of these amendments are relatively, minor substantive, adjusting some caps of, monies that they would be able to distribute without additional, need to go through process, et cetera, as he was discussing. Here on the bottom of page 2, this is in the contents of the report as he was describing what the information that has to be provided to the Treasurer's office. And this is what he was just referring to on line 20, an explanation of benefits as the report is provided to them so they can require that information. Moving through page 3, you have the expenses that the Treasurer's office can deduct. And here under subdivision 5, lines 12 through 20, as was mentioned, there's an increase from 100 to 150. The Treasurer's office transfers that money over to the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund on line 17. And the new language you have here would be diverting up to 300,000 of that to the Retirement Security Fund. And as he mentioned, that's the administrative fund that they use to govern the Vermont Saves program. So you have the new language there. Section 3 at the top of page 4 is simply removing that. This is the sunset that would go into effect January 1 of 2040. So you would have 13, give or take 13 and a half years of funds going into the Vermont Saves Fund until it sunset. Moving into section 4, the bottom of page 4 and the top of page 5, this is going to be as was mentioned, when an individual is claiming property, so you can see there, section 1553, claim for property, they have to provide certain information to verify its completeness and accuracy, unless the administrator can waive those requirements. And this is where it's raising the cap, as he mentioned, from 250 to 1,000. You move into the next section, as was mentioned, around estates and deceased individuals or multiple claimants. So you can see here the administrator on line 7, administrator may deliver the property as follows. In the case of a closed estate, if it's valued at increasing from 5 to 10,000 in the absence of an open state or a decree of distribution, again, increasing from 5 to 10,000. And this just outlines how those funds are distributed from the unclaimed properties. So then moving into section 6, this is going to be on page 6. The majority of this bill is dealing with the Vermont retirement systems. And as was mentioned, everything primarily here is going to be transferring administration of those OPEB trust funds from the state treasurer's office over to the Vermont Pension Investment Commission. So what you'll see here, once I get to section 8 and beyond, there's a lot of strike through of language, and then it's simply enacting that exact same language over in the Pension Investment Commission chapter. So it's really just a lot of moving of language from a statutory perspective, moving it from one section over into another section. Quickly though, section 6, as was mentioned, this is for employees of political subdivisions that are participating in the state retirement system. The language here does allow the treasurer to assess a penalty. I'm on line 4 here, a penalty against the employer at a rate of 1% of the amount due for each month calculated. The treasurer, I think described this adequately. I would just highlight for you all, this is the state treasurer assessing penalties against other political subdivisions of the state. And then potentially taking those entities into court to recover those funds if necessary. So I'm just flagging that for you all. Other than that, it's the penalty. It's 1% of the amount due for each month. And the second half of this provision, again, allows them to take action in court if necessary. Section 7, the funding task force, as was mentioned, I'll just run through a few quick things. Membership, which is going to be on the top of page 8. Membership of this task force is the chair of the House Committee and the Senate Committee on Appropriations, the Secretary of Administration or designee, the State Treasurer or designee, one member appointed by the Vermont National Education Association, one member appointed by the Vermont State Employees Association, and one member appointed by the president of the Vermont Troopers Association. So that would be the membership of the task force as it's currently outlined. Powers and duties reviewing the existing funding schedules and methodologies for those for trust funds, the state employees, teachers, the state employees retirement trust fund, teachers retirement trust fund, and then those two OPEB trust funds that was mentioned. One thing, the specific review, what they will be looking at here on page 9, I won't go through each of these. I would just comment that the task force, this is on line 13 and 14, the task force shall not make recommendation on member benefits, contribution levels, or assumed rates of return. So there is a little bit of what they will look at and a specific provision of what they will not look at. There is a report due at December 15th of this year. So this is all standard information regarding task force and working groups that we have. When do they meet? What's a quorum? Compensation. There is per diem reimbursement for individuals who are not state employees. And then, as was mentioned, there is an appropriation of $75,000 from the general fund to cover the costs of the task force. Okay. Section 8, and we are on page 11. So here's where, as I mentioned, everything at this point going to where we get to the debt provision is just removing language and then moving it over to the Vermont Pension Investment Commission. So I'm not going to go through each of these line by line, but some things that I will highlight are top of page 15. So this is in the State Employees Retirement Trust Fund section. So you can see sub A, members of the Vermont Pension Investment Commission are the trustees of those funds. So what we're doing is we're just taking away the fact that the state treasurer is the custodian. I highlight that the state treasurer can already enter into agreement with the Vermont Pension Investment Commission to invest these funds. But I think the state treasurer, and I shouldn't speak for him, but I think their goal is to not have to go through that and really give the ownership of those to the Vermont Pension Investment Commission and not have to go through that process where the state treasurer would then still be the custodian and the kind of fiduciary of those. Again, what you have, you're just removing language in each of these sections and we're moving it over. So this is just a lot of cleanup of language in each of these sections. So apologies for the quick scroll. I'm just trying to keep you all moving forward. Page 18, section 521 here. This is where we're adding under the definition of plan. So this is for the Vermont Pension Investment Commission. We're adding the retired teachers OPEB and the state employees OPEB trust funds into their purview. So everything again continued over is simply cleanup of all of this information and then moving over word for word what has been struck in the state teachers and the state employees retirement sections. So with that, unless you all have any questions, I'm going to move you all the way down to the end of the bill. Apologies for the scroll.
No, you're talking about this is good jaunt.
Yeah, okay. So we get to section 21, which is on page 32. This is where, as was mentioned, these next two sections are authorizing individuals who serve as president of an employee organization, allowing them to receive credit for that service. And I think he walked through those two pieces. So this one is for the Vermont Teachers Retirement Fund, just allowing, as I said, individual elected to serve as president to, elect to have that year served as creditable service. And then the next section, section 22, is in the municipal chapter for municipal retirement. Lastly, the capital debt. Here's where I will make a few additional comments to what was mentioned by the treasurer. You have this capital debt affordability advisory committee. As was mentioned, they issue this report every year. There was some recommended cleanup language. You all made some amendments to that section last year, and I will simply highlight that it's not the changes that you all made to the sections last year are not word for word what was recommended by the committee, but I think it still accomplishes the same goal. So I'm not sure that this change is actually necessary. I leave that to you all as whether you want to just go with what the committee recommended or not. But I will simply, highlight this is in the report that has to be provided, and it says the committee shall consider among a lot of things here. You have under sub 4 criteria that reorganized bond rating agencies use to judge the quality of issues of state bonds, including, you all changed this to say other metrics at the committee's discretion. And the recommendation here is to strike that and say other metrics adopted by recognized bond agencies. And my point would be there's nothing at the committee's discretion, there's nothing stopping them from reviewing that as the language is currently written. So what you would be doing of adopting this language is further narrowing the scope of things that they can consider. I leave that to you all, whether that's good policy. I'm just saying that they could take into consideration what's being recommended already based on the language you passed last year. Same thing with the next change here on the top of page 36. I think this is just more a change of language as opposed to a change of substance, but happy to dig into that if you all take this bill up and want to move it forward. Last thing I'll comment, positions, as was mentioned by the state treasurer, 2 full-time positions for unclaimed property, 1 full-time position for policy and research manager for the retirement division. Effective dates, the task force would take effect on passage, so they could go ahead and begin their work because they have the report due in December of this year. And then section 3 is the sunset of taking those unclaimed property funds and giving them to Vermont Saves program, the diversion of that money. That's the sunset would go into effect January 1, 2040. That's your bill. I think I did all that in less than 20 minutes.
Nice work.
Any questions for council right now? I mean, we are going to do extensive work on this, so
Extensive.
yes. Well done.
Thank you.
Maybe Mark would want to give me some downtime before my 2:30. So, wow, we did it. All right. Happy Friday to everyone, and we will be back in action on Tuesday.